In this video, I'm going to show you how artists use a grid to more accurately draw something from a photograph, and you can also use it to enlarge a drawing from a photograph. So you need a good reference photo printed on a piece of paper, and you need paper. And the important thing is to have a paper that is in the correct ratio of your picture. So for example, this image is 5.5 inches wide and 7.5 inches tall. So we are using a 2-to-1 ratio with paper to photo. Since it's 5.5 inches across, you do 5.5 times 2, and I get 11. Since it's 7 inches tall, you do 7 times 2, and I get 14. So 5.5 by 7 and 11 by 14. So I've got a 1-to-2 ratio. So my rectangle size is the same for my photo and my paper. The next thing that we're going to do, we're going to draw a 1-inch grid on our photograph, and then we will draw a 2-inch grid on our paper. This way we'll have the same number of squares on each. When we do this, it breaks the image down into smaller sections so we can draw what we see in each square. This makes it a little easier to get things proportionally correct, and that's why artists do that. So, step 1, I'm going to set my paper aside, and I'm going to use my photo and draw a 1-inch grid on this. So when I'm drawing my grid on my photo, I'm going to show you a couple of different rulers, and we're going to talk about those. These are the 2 different rulers that I have currently in my classroom right now. So this ruler, it shows inches on both sides. So I'm going to go over the basics of a ruler just because I know that some students need that. On this ruler, these darker pink lines, each one is 1 inch. The edge of the ruler starts at 0. So with this ruler, one side of my ruler is inches and one side is centimeters. So we want to make sure we're using the side of the ruler that uses inches. With this ruler, 0 starts here. And this is important to notice, so you have to be aware of that. When I draw my 1-inch grid on my photo, I'm going to use a 6B pencil. I'm doing this because the graphite is darker. I've got a variety of grays in this photo, and I want the graphite to show up on top of that, so that's why I'm using the 6B. So if I'm using this ruler, I'm going to move it up near the top of the photo, and I'm going to line up the 0 with the edge of the photo. And then I'm going to make a mark right above each inch. So I'm going to make a line right here. You need to be looking straight down, because if you're looking at an angle, sometimes it's hard and you'll have a little bit of an error. The more accurate your grid is, the more accurate your drawing will be. Now remember, I said that the width of my photo was 5.5 inches. The reason I did that is because an 11 by 14 inch paper, that's a pretty standard size, so it should be fairly easy to find a frame or a mat to fit that if you end up liking your drawing well enough to frame or mat it. But 11 is an odd number. So when you divide that by 2, you get 5.5. So I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this last edge of the picture is going to fall on a 1/2 inch. So you're going to have a shorter area here. That's fine. That's totally okay. If I was using this ruler, 0 is the edge of the ruler. So I would line the ruler right up with the edge of the photo. And I still have each mark lined up with this darker line, the inch line. Okay, so if I were to just go ahead and draw a straight line to make my grid, I have no way of knowing, is my line actually straight? I can kind of look and see it's parallel to the edge of the photo, but trusting my eye isn't a good idea because I have a photo right here And this is going to give me a little bit of an optical illusion. So lines that I think might be straight aren't necessarily straight. So I need to give myself a mark to connect it to down here that I know is exactly at each inch, marked at each inch. So I'm going to line the edge of the ruler up, or sorry, I'm going to line up the 0 with the edge of the photo again down here. And I'm going to make a mark at each inch line down here near the bottom of the photo too. Now I have something to connect it to. You may have to angle your head a little bit to see the mark because it's a little bit, it can be shiny since it's graphite. All right, so I'm going to connect these marks to make a row of lines that are exactly 1 inch apart. So if I were to try to line this up with this mark and then line it up down here, I might be playing this game where like, oh, I got this one lined up and now I get this one lined up. Oops, this one moved. Here's what I do. I put my pencil right on that mark up here, and now I can pivot my ruler. And this one's not going anywhere. Now I can look down here. It's right next to the edge of the ruler, and I can make a straight line. Gonna line or put my pencil right on this mark, pivot my ruler, get it lined up so that it's right next to the ruler down here, and draw a straight line. And I'm going to do this all the way across. You want to make sure that your line goes from the top of the photo all the way down to the bottom. So now I have 1 inch rows all the way across, and then I've got a little 1/2 inch row here because it's 5.5 inches across. So now I'm going to rotate my image so that it goes this way because we need 1 inch rows going across this side. Okay, we're going to repeat the same step that we did the first time. I'm going to line up the 0 marking, or the edge of the ruler if I'm using this ruler, with the edge of the photo. And I'm going to carefully mark right above each inch. And then I don't have to mark the last inch, that is the edge of the photo. So because this is exactly 7 inches this way, I'm not going to have a little 1/2 inch this time. I'm going to move my ruler down, do the same thing down here. And now I'm going to rotate my ruler and connect each of these marks. All right, so now we should have 5.5 rows this way and 7 rows this way. Each of the squares are 1 inch by 1 inch. So now you need your paper that is 2 times the size of your photo. So 5.5 by 7, now I have 11 by 14. I'm going to use a larger ruler this time because if I were to use this smaller ruler on these long edges, I'd have to keep moving it down, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to use this larger ruler. So because this is 2 times larger than this, we're doing a 2-inch grid. So you have a couple of choices when using a pencil. I'm going to use an HB pencil. Another good choice would be a 2B, and let me tell you the difference between the two. So when we draw out this picture, I'm going to have a whole grid of squares, and I'm going to use that grid to draw my photograph. Now, once we finish the drawing, we're going to shade it. You have 2 choices. You can erase the lines on your grid and then shade it, Or you can trace your drawing onto a new paper without grid lines and shade that one. The second option is the one that I'm going to lead my students to do in my class. If you plan on erasing your lines, you want really, really light lines that are easy to erase. You also want to make sure that those lines don't indent your paper. So what I mean by that, if I'm using the HB pencil and I press even slightly hard, you're going to get a divot in your paper, so that even if you erase your line, you're going to have places that it's hard to get graphite in later. So you're going to have like a white line that you've shaded over and that the graphite's not getting into. And that can be a pain. So I suggest, regardless of whichever pencil you use, you press very lightly because you don't want to indent the paper. If you can control your pencil pressure, I would use a 2B and just press really lightly. That would be the way that I would go. So I'm going to do the same thing on this paper that I did on this paper. We have to make marks, and we have to make marks at the top and at the bottom and connect them. The only difference is this time we're making them every 2 inches. So we can line up the edge of the ruler with the edge of the paper and make sure it's lined up exactly. And for those of you that like to look at the numbers, let me turn it so that it's not backwards. So if you're lining it up with the edge of the paper, you're making a mark at every other inch. So I'm doing 1, and then I'm going to make a mark at 2. So basically the even numbers. 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. And now we've got this little 1/2 inch. Now, in my class, my paper cutter, the blade is a little off. So I always cut my paper a little bit too big. If you want to make a mark here where that 1/2 inch is, and I can cut off that extra little bit for you, you can do that. That's totally up to you. But you're going to have, just like you had in this paper, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5. You're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is going to be your 1/2. So even though that they're every 2 inches, it's going to be set up the same way. All right, we have marks across the top. Move your ruler down. We're going to do it at the bottom too. It doesn't matter how far. It doesn't have to be the very bottom, just enough that you've got enough space between the two. Make a mark at every even number again. And remember to press lightly. I'm pressing harder than I should because I'm making a video and I want you to be able to see the marks. But you want to press as lightly as you can and still see the marks. Now we're connecting those. Same thing, I'm going to put my pencil up here. Pivot my ruler so that the other mark is lined up right beside it. Draw a straight line from the very top of the paper to the very bottom of the paper, all the way across. We're using the whole paper. So don't let it confuse you just because we didn't cut out this image exactly. There's white space around it. We only gridded the actual photo. We're gridding the whole paper. And what can happen for you is what just happened for me. I wasn't pressing down really good on my ruler. It's good if you spread your fingers all the way so that it covers as much space as you can and press down. I wasn't doing that, and that's why my ruler slipped. So I'm going to line everything back up, make sure I've got my fingers evenly spread across, pressing down, and try again. This is one thing that I find students really struggle with, is getting the line all the way across without the ruler slipping. And that's really important. I've got my fingers spread from here to here, all the way across, and I'm pressing down. All right, now we're gonna rotate it and do the same thing. Gonna line the edge of my ruler up with the edge of the paper. And I'm gonna make a mark right over every other inch, so all of the even numbers. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and then I've got that little bit where it's a little bit too big down here. Move it down here, do it one more time. So my students, I can cut that little bit of paper off for you if you bring it to me, if that's bothering you. Okay, now we're ready to start drawing. Before you start, make sure that everything matches. You want 5.5 squares across, and you want 7 squares down. And everything should look straight, nothing should look crooked. This might deceive your eyes a little bit because the photo that's underneath the grid, if the head is tilted or you've got diagonal lines, there's some things that may make things look crooked, but if you know you measured everything out right, it is probably correct.